Mob Psycho is a comedy. In fact, the One Punch Man webcomic is also a comedy. I've observed that when you take out the comedy from O&E's work, the author of Mob Psycho and One Punch Man, for example, if you take out the comedy from the second season of Mob Psycho, or Murata's version of One Punch Man, a lot of the magic is gone. I'm only going to talk about the anime Mob Psycho though, Season 1 specifically, because I think it's a great work of art. Season 1 begins with a typical comedy setup. Reagan is a fraud psychic who is essentially pimping a real psychic, the best psychic ever most likely, who is Mob. Mob is too dumb and innocent to realize Reagan is cutting him out of a salary, and Reagan routinely cuts down Mob's self-confidence so that Mob is dependent on him. This is a similar type of character relationship as Excel and Il Palazzo. Mob is also like Luluco from the titular Space Patrol Luluco, or, a Western reference, Charlie Day from Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Not in terms of character traits, but that his social incompetence is how other people use him, from Tsubome, Karata Tome, and Dimple. The setup also works from a dramatic standpoint. Comedy comes from a character's faults. Drama comes from the character's faults arising out of their virtues. Mob's virtues, his mastery over psychicness, is typically hidden from society, thus accentuating his social incompetence. When this is flipped, when the scene focuses on psychicness, it seamlessly transitions to drama because psychicness is always used for violence. The best example of this dynamic is episode 3, which to me is a classic episode. Mob's goal from the beginning of the series has been pretty simple. He wants a cute girl to notice him. Up until that point, the series has been comedic in tone. A character, Reagan or Mob, enters some situation out of their depth. For example, meeting an actual ghost, trying to join an after-school club, infiltrating an all-girls school to stop a pervert ghost. Every episode resolves in a positive ending. Episode 3 starts with Mob being out of his depth, joining the bodybuilding club to, why else, get muscles to impress chicks. After an amusing dialogue with Karata Tome, who wants to use Mob's psychicness to talk to aliens, Mob gets seriously disturbed by Tome's accurate claim that Mob will never be popular. Conveniently, as Mob walks home, he meets a cultist who promises him happiness. Well, that's pretty convenient, so Mob follows her. But it's rapidly shown that psychicness is involved, and the story turns into drama. Brilliantly, O&E introduced a new character, Misato Ichi, who is the opposite of Mob, to serve as the audience insert. For a while, we follow her thoughts and her rationalizing the true nature of the cult. Presumably, Mob in the background is not thinking about anything and is living his best life. The scene where Ichi is converted is taken out of the horror movie. Horror then turns to comedy when the lens returns to Mob, cluelessly blinded by a burlap sack. We know he has incredible psychic powers, but he has no idea what's going on. It's our knowledge that he is going to be totally fine, but also that he can turn around the situation with his powers, that leave us in anticipation of further humor and drama. The story then escalates into drama when he gets angry, but how he becomes angry is interesting in itself. The flashback shown is a pretty standard childhood memory. A boy shows his butt around. It's hard for me to describe. And all the kids laugh, except for Mob. He isn't bullied, but he realizes he isn't normal, and therefore probably not going to be liked. The flashback fits better in a comedic context because of the inappropriateness of the buttocks and the general theme, that Mob isn't normal, but given the context of a cult leader gaslighting him, it becomes dramatic. Mob's rage takes on a biblical proportion. The cultist's body is on the ceiling, looking like paintings of the Christian apocalypse or hell. I'm not sure if the Christian resemblance was intentional, but it was clearly meant to be fantastical like Christian imagery, literally elevating Mob's powers to biblical heights. Interestingly, Dimple's attack on Mob has a comedic structure. He arrogantly attacks Mob, which does not affect him at all. This is a simple action escalation structure in comedy. A character takes an action, and then our understanding of the situation escalates. This is clearly demonstrated in Fooly Cooly, where Haruko will suggest something inappropriate, and regardless of Naoto's reaction, the situation gets worse. She escalates. Dimple then tries to do this super move, but ends up losing his arm. He tries to use a very large blade, but it snaps. Finally, spiritually beaten, he unleashes like a big psychic beam, which Mob slaps around. He then explodes Dimple. This anticlimax would typically be comedic, but because the scene was masterfully executed, the drama registers immediately. Mob then admits regret at having destroyed the cult to Reagan, and Reagan gives a comedic response. "You're so clueless it's impossible for you not to ruin someone else's fun." But his next response is profound. He tells Mob that these people were not feeling true emotions, and that not being genuine is actually quite painful. This is surprising coming from Reagan because he's a bit of an idiot, as established in episodes 1 and 2. In fact, the brilliance is that Reagan is probably still an idiot, and he has no idea what is going on because he thinks psychicness is bullshit. But he told the truth regardless. And I can't understand that that's brilliant. That's O&E, or the director, writers of the anime, brilliantly and subtly combining dramatic and comedic tones, dramatically resolving Mob's inner conflict and growth, and having a comedic interaction between these two characters with a fundamental theme. It's really a magic trick, overall. You really can't pull apart this relationship between comedy and drama, or the whole thing falls apart. Earlier I said comedy is from a character's faults, and drama is from those faults in the context of virtue. That's where the adage, tragedy plus time equals comedy comes from. Tragedy is a character realizing the virtuous way, but falling short because of their faults. It is depression, anxiety, guilt, and angst. But time trivializes these faults because, as it happens, we live at the end. Tragedy happens, our prior life crumbles, and because we keep living, a new one is steadily created from the wreckage. Comedy is really about life, that despite suffering we still live, and that living we ultimately adjust to suffering, hence Dante's Divine Comedy. This is also precisely why Teru and Ritsu work in the anime. It's because we had something called time, the logical resolution of their faults, to their tragedies. Teru finally gets the crap kicked out of him, and Ritsu has Mob big brother him. That's exactly why you can't rip out Mob's essential nature as a comedy. Without the emphasis on the character's faults, for example, Mob's ineptitude, Reagan's fraudulence, Teru's ego, Tomei's delusions of grandeur, Dimple's Napoleon complex, you just don't get the message at the end, which is that working hard and living healthy are a lot better than having psychic powers. Teru used to think that psychic powers are the fastest way to get something, but as Mob demonstrates, life can quickly make you look like a buffoon, with or without psychic powers. There's a scene of Onigawara that wouldn't work without the comedic aspect. Comedy humanizes characters. As we recall, Onigawara is the same guy who used Mob as bait for the rival school's gang, knowing full well Mob would be hurt. In the scene, he is being outed by his class as a pervert who likes to lick girls' clarinets, which is pretty funny in itself. The scene progresses by an escalation of his own mental image. He gets rejected by the girl he confessed to in grade school, and then he is literally thrown underneath a girl's skirt. Finally, his own mental image gets erased. Your understanding of his inner conflict is because of the comedy. If you only saw the moments of anger and depression, you might have missed that he was a human being. You might have focused specifically on Ritsu and the president because of the indignity. You might have focused on the classroom for being so judgmental. Or you might have rolled your eyes. But because of the comedy, you'll look at it in terms of himself looking at himself. Not from any objective standpoint, but as to his unique, biased, erroneous standpoint. This is impressive to me because I'm not a high school gang leader, and yet I understand. An added benefit of the series being a comedy is that it doesn't need to solve anything at all. It's not the case at all that comedy is harder to write than tragedy, or vice versa. For tragedy, the writer has to keep the image of the story's original sin firmly in the audience's mind. I'd use Hamlet as an example, but I'll use The Great Gatsby instead, because everyone had to read it in high school. The original sin is Gatsby meeting Daisy. The ending, through Nick and Jordan and the green light, evokes the themes of the fickleness of woman and the romance of Gatsby and Daisy's meeting. Note, ladies, I did not write The Great Gatsby, a gentleman called F. Scott Fitzgerald did. In short, a tragedy, because it is introspective by nature, has to make you think upon the reasons why the plot happened in the first place. A comedy doesn't necessarily have to work that hard. Clearly something is wrong in a tragedy. Nothing is wrong in a comedy. It is simply a product of human error. At the end of Mob Psycho, Reagan gives a memorable speech to the scars about how people can't live with shoulder pads and dots on their forehead, and how people need to get over things. What's important about the speech is that he has no idea what's going on, except that a bunch of grown men are beating up children. Reagan just recontextualizes what they're doing in a broader lens. When they realize this, the entire enterprise looks really pointless, and they try to make something new in their lives. No one dies, except maybe the old guy in the gas mask, and everyone comes out a bit wiser. Nothing has been solved, human error being eternal, but for the time being there's peace. Thanks for listening.